Welcome to the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library. On exhibition until this fall is Faith and Power, Government and Religion in Tudor Stuart England. The exhibition was created by Grace Butkowski, a student at the College of Saint Benedict, where she studies history and French. She is HMML's 2013 Irma Wyman Intern for Education and Outreach.
The religious turmoil of early modern England was born out of the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s. King Henry VIII had grown tired of the Pope's refusal to grant his divorce to his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. So in 1534, he forced Parliament to pass the Act of Supremacy, making him supreme governor of the Church of England. Henry's son Edward, who reigned after him, took the church in a far more Protestant direction. Under his reign, the Book of Common Prayer was written by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. But Edward was young and died young childless. He was followed by his older sister, Mary. Mary was a militant Catholic, and she longed to restore the English Church to the Church of Rome. After her marriage to Prince Philip of Spain, she began to persecute the Protestants in her reign. 238 Protestants were executed, mostly through burning. But, like her brother, Mary died childless, and the final child of King Henry VIII, Elizabeth, took the throne. Like Edward, Elizabeth was a Protestant, although a much more moderate one. She reinstated the Church of England in the Second Act of Uniformity and Second Act of Supremacy. This made her the supreme governor of the Church of England, although she declared that she did not want to make windows into men's souls. But she was also unmarried, without a child. Her heir was Mary, Queen of Scots, the Catholic ruler of Scotland. Mary was forced to abdicate her throne, and she fled to Elizabeth for help. Elizabeth kept her under house arrest for 23 years. As the Catholic heir, she was a major threat to the Protestant Elizabeth. This first piece is a signed letter from Elizabeth, dated to the Earl of Morton in 1575. The Earl of Morton was the 4th regent of Scotland for Mary's son, James I. And in this, Elizabeth scolds the Earl of Morton for not doing his job. It takes place a couple years after the Ridolfi plot, in which Elizabeth had meant to be assassinated. She notes her suspicions of Mary. Elizabeth was succeeded by Mary's son James. From James VI of Scotland, he became James I of England. Under his reign, the King James Bible was created. During King James' reign, a new Protestant faction came to power, the Puritans. They were much more radically Protestant than James in the Church of England. James was succeeded by his son, Charles I. Now, Charles I was king of both Scotland and of England, but the two countries had radically different political and religious systems. Scotland was much more Puritan and Presbyterian in its nature. This meant that its religious councils were governed by groups of wise leaders. The Anglican Church in England was governed by a hierarchy of bishops, similar to the Catholic Church. Charles wished to unify the two, and in 1633, he nominated William Laud, Archbishopric of Canterbury. Laud attempted to unify the two religions, but he failed. In 1638, Scotland outright rejected the Anglican Church and adopted Presbyterianism. A small conflict broke out, the First Bishops' War. Now, Presbyterianism in its structure was far more like a parliament, and Anglicanism was far more like the nobles and the lords of the king. And these two systems come into conflict. Parliament had control over extraordinary taxation, any taxation above the norm. And a king is always running into debts, particularly Charles I. Charles managed to rule without the Parliament for 9 years, mostly by forcing his friends to give him money, but he's eventually prompted to call a Parliament. This Parliament could not stand James, and the relationships between the two parties grew increasingly antagonistic. Finally, Charles attempted to arrest 5 of the members of Parliament for treason. They had escaped out the back door 5 minutes beforehand. To this day, that is why the Queen of England cannot enter the House of Commons without being invited. Civil war broke out between Parliament and the King. It raged on, off and on, for about 10 years. In 1649, Charles is captured. On January 30th, he is executed. This piece, the Eikon Basilike, was published just days after his death. It recounts his letters and his life, and forms a devotional work. It goes through 47 different editions, and is translated into Latin. It's so popular that John Milton has to write a response to it, the Iconoclastes. It's responsible for the growth of a martyr cult around Charles I that's still present in the Anglican Church. 1649, Cromwell leads an invasion of Ireland, in which 41% of the population dies. 1653, Oliver Cromwell becomes Lord Protector. During this period, Protestants were allowed to practice openly, and this led to the rise of many new Protestant denominations, among them the Quakers. But Anglicans and Catholics were suppressed. After Cromwell died, his son ruled ineffectually for a few years, and in 1660, Charles II, son of Charles I, was brought back from France. It's a period known as the Restoration. It's a period of great literature and great art, but not particularly of great toleration. King Charles II tried to institute some religious toleration for Catholics, but it did not pass. He was forced to revoke almost everything. He also instituted the Clarendon Code, which tried to prevent Anglican nonconformers from preaching, such as the Quakers. In 1679, a popish plot to take over the political structures of the government was discovered. But there was no actual plot. It was a conspiracy theory. What it did do was reveal that the heir to the throne, Charles's brother James, was a Catholic. Now, Charles had no legitimate children. His wife, a Catholic Infanta, was barren, but he had 19 illegitimate ones. This meant that after his death, his Catholic brother would become the heir to the throne. And that is exactly what happened. As Charles was dying, he converted at the very last moment to the Roman Catholic Church, and a Catholic took the throne. James II tried to institute some toleration for Catholics, but tensions were high. His wife was young, Mary of Modena, and she became pregnant in 1687. This stoked the flames of fear even higher. Now, James had 2 other children by his first wife, who were Protestant, Mary and Anne. Mary was married to William, Prince of Orange. As this child was now born, a son and an heir, the nobles realized that they now had a Catholic heir to the throne, and that became intolerable. 7 nobles, 1 bishop, 6 members of the aristocracy, invited William and Mary to take the throne of England, which they did. In 1688, they led an invasion of England. Although not completely without conflict, it was relatively bloodless, and they took the throne of England. James II was forced to flee to France with his wife and his infant son, where they would become known as the Pretenders. When William and Mary took the throne, they signed the English Bill of Rights, which instituted, among other things, the banning of cruel and unusual punishment. And this is the beginnings of the constitutional monarchy that we now have in England.
The Hill Museum and Manuscript Library's mission is to identify, digitally photograph, catalog, and archive endangered manuscripts belonging to threatened communities around the world. Having formed partnerships with over 520 libraries and archives, the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library has photographically preserved over 140,000 medieval, Renaissance, and early modern manuscripts from Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and India. Grace's exhibition is available for viewing 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday, and Saturdays from noon to 4 p.m.